Welcome to this episode of Small Bike Stuff, World Bike Review. I'm Tom on a budget, welcome to Australia, and this is my Honda Wave 125i.
Whoa, easy Tiger, that's my job. Welcome to this episode of Small Bike Stuff. That's Tom, I'm Callum. We both own Honda Wave 125s, and this is another episode of Around the World, the series where anyone from anywhere in the world can pull out their phone or their camera or whatever they've got, capture some clips of their small bike, send them to me, and I'll put them on YouTube. I usually sit here and interject and add extra information to help quantify things, but Tom has done such a good job that I'm just going to let this play. And if you want to know how to get your bike on Small Bike Stuff, then stay till the end and I'll let you know how. Anyway, take it away, Tom. It's your channel now.
This is a Thai-spec motorbike. It's a 2014 model year bike. I bought it in January of 2014. It was built, I think, in late 2013. It's pretty much the same as what Callum has, except for some slightly different stickers on it. The colors were also the same as well. I have bought it with the intent of traveling around Southeast Asia and then eventually around the world, kind of like what Ed March did. That's why I have modified mine, and that's where some of the differences are between our motorbikes. And I'm sure that you'll be interested in finding out how different they are. Me and this bike, we've got quite a history. I have bought it in January 2014 with the intention to use it as my everyday bike and also to commute. I always liked these, and this one in particular. I liked it actually so much that not only have I traveled around Southeast Asia with it, as you've heard, we're in Australia. I consider this my everyday bike, and to me it was worth it to spend the expenses of bringing it into the country. To those Australians wondering, I did bring it in through the personal import option. If you look it up online, you can do that if you have lived overseas for enough time and you've owned a vehicle. I was very lucky that I could do that. It has over the time clocked up over 95,000 kilometers, and I've got big plans coming up next year to take it around the world, and that's why it's been modified quite a bit. Let's have a look. This is a gem of an engine. It's dating back, or the design is dating back to the original Honda Super Cup. It's a flat design, kind of like half a boxer, and it's mounted inside of the frame, which really improves your center of gravity or the center of mass of your bike. It's also mounted off the swing arm, unlike what you find on a scooter, which tend to keep them on there. So if you've ever taken something like a Honda PCX or like another scooter on gravel, you tend to notice how the rear wheel just bounces around a lot more. These have got a much nicer time and they handle much better on gravel. It is fuel injected, which means you just turn key and it fires up. That fuel injection system is very basic, but it just works. It doesn't matter what fuel you put in, what temperature it's running at. There are no flat spots. It just runs even after a year in storage. It's got the check engine light, and that check engine light will flash codes at you that you can then read up in the manual, and you can then address it from there. It's a bit easier to kind of work with than some, let's say, more modern or German vehicles which need tools for that. It's very reliable. Mine has lasted me 80,000 kilometers before a bearing went on the inside. It was the bearing in here. But because it's quite simple, if anything goes wrong, they're quite repairable and very easy to work on. They're lawnmowers that are more complicated. It's just 2 valves, 1 cylinder, air-cooled. There's not even water pumps or anything that you need to worry about. Very basic to fix. Anybody who worked on motorbikes can repair them quite easily. Honda keep improving these engines. So if you've come off something like a Honda Innova that you've got in Europe still, or the A&F Wave, or you've got one of the new ones, if you try to do your own work on them, just beware that like Honda do keep changing them internally quite a bit. So parts change, sometimes specifications change. So inside here, that's where you adjust your valves. The specifications for those are different. They're actually the same as on the Grom, because the Grom has gotten its engine from this bike. This is a gold plug. It's a magnetic sump plug, or it's a sump plug with a neodymium magnet on the other end. And that magnet just picks up any metal debris or metal shavings or ferrous metal shavings that are floating around inside your engine. Because these are air-cooled, they do go through a much wider temperature cycles than a water-cooled engine that just goes close to boiling point and stays there. These here, because metal contracts and expands with temperature, shed a lot more metal into the oil. They also have a very basic oil filtration system. It's just a spinner on here that just kind of works with centrifugal force to kind of collect heavier bits than oil on the outside, and that collects anything from cam chain rubbings, the gearbox sheds a bit, the piston rings, and all sorts of parts. And the most dangerous parts are those that are hard, and that magnetic sump plug picks those up. What kills these engines is actually what I just talked about, is the oil filtration or just oiling. Because they have a very shallow sump, if you do run low on oil, it's very easy to happen. They also burn a little bit of oil if you're doing prolonged periods at high RPM. So if you're kind of taking them touring, every now and then just stop, check the oil just to make sure you're not running low, because that's how it can run out. Another problem as well is if you do wheelies with them, the oil pickup is right here in the front. So if you go kind of vertical, that oil pools in the back and there's no oil going through your engine. So that is one item, please take care of it. If you do get it serviced in Southeast Asia, tell your mechanics every 12,000 kilometers to absolutely service that spinner inside, because they sometimes tend to forget and they just filter, or they just clean the strainer that sits at the bottom in here. In Southeast Asia, or in Thailand at least, these bikes come with two different choices of wheels. They can either come with the spoke wheels or with cast wheels. Contrary to most adventure bikes, these come with the spokes as the cheaper option, which is kind of amazing. I've got the spoked wheels, which have got a steel rim around the outside, which unfortunately means that you have to fit tubes. That's a bit of a pain if you ever run into a puncture, but it just makes installation a little bit easier. This is my second front wheel. Because these spokes, they're actually part of your suspension. They kind of flex around a little bit every time you go over undulations. They do, once you reach a certain lifespan, they start to suffer from metal fatigue and they start to ping around here. So it is kind of good practice every now and then to just check them. The rear wheel on this bike, it looks stock, but it's not. This is of an Australian spec Honda NBC 110, which is different to the Thai NBC 110 or the Honda Dream. I fitted this here as a recommendation by Mike O'Neill from Lambda Motorcycles in Caboolture. This has got stronger spokes, they're thicker and they're also shorter. And they're shorter by having a bigger rear drum. The rear drum, I actually didn't need that. The stock brake is already pretty good. It's actually on par, if not better than even the Grom and the Monkey. This just suffers more from brake fade because it's a drum brake compared to a disc. One disadvantage, however, is it's not a straight swap if you consider upgrading to that wheel on your Innova or a Wave. That shaft on here, because these bearings are bigger, they use a 14mm shaft on the inside, and they've also fitted that on the NBC 110. This is only 12, so you do need to get a sleeve machined to go through here, so it now fits. It actually makes kind of assembly of the entire construction in the back a bit easier, because you just now can put everything on here together. The modifications on this bike are a lot. There's a lot of them, and I try to kind of get through them without getting too boring. In general, I have tried to set it up to be comfortable for commutes and to tour long distance. I get some snarky comments every now and then from bikers and non-bikers, but they don't do 800-kilometer days on just 10 horsepower. The first modification I have done, even like straight in Thailand, was this basket. It already came with a cheap knockoff, but they don't have that strong metal bone that goes through here. This is a genuine Honda part, and Callum has got the same one as well. It's great for just kind of transporting loose items. When I'm touring, I tend to transport my Camelback in here as well. It did get me into a little bit of trouble with the Australian police because it is obstructing my indicators, and I had to rectify that. And what I've done was I have mounted these indicators on here. If I turn on the ignition, there we go, you'll now see them flash together. These are mounted onto my Barkbusters. The Barkbusters are mounted on these spotlight mounts. Those were one of the earlier mods that I had done in Thailand. I have since redone this mount in here. And those are just those cheap eBay mounts or eBay spotlights for four-wheel drives that you get. They really improve your visibility at nighttime. I ride a lot in the Australian outback at night where you've got kangaroos. It's not recommended to do that. I do it at my own risk, and they really help me with that. These bikes have an interesting charging system. All of that essentially kind of sent me down a rabbit hole when I installed these Oxford heated grips. Callum has got them on his bike as well, and these are great. At the moment it's winter in Queensland, and I use them pretty much daily to keep my hands warm. However, these draw a lot of power, And on my commutes when I was still living in Sydney, I would see that on this controller, the eco light would kind of come on telling me that the battery was getting weak, even though the engine was still running. And that told me that I needed to do something with the charging. And one of the most efficient ways to increase your charging is to remove something that drains a lot of power that it doesn't need to. And one of those biggest power drainers is headlights. From factory, these run incandescent bulbs, and those are essentially just big giant heaters that convert electricity into heat and only a little bit into light. LEDs are doing a much better job at that. However, to install them, you have to tackle with that motorbike charging system. That charging system essentially runs off, and it's standard motorbike stuff mostly, it runs off a stator inside of here that is energized through magnets on a flywheel. This spits out single wave AC. Some bikes have got three phase, this is single phase. And that phase is split into two different parts. One part is for the entire DC circuit, which powers your lights, your running lights, your indicators, battery, fuel injection system, all of the stuff that needs to be run normally. The other half is used to run the headlight, and it goes straight off the stator, which is why the lights, they can go actually almost dim when you're sitting at idle, and they turn off when the engine isn't spinning. In my instance, you can see they're kind of like on straight away. The problem we run into with that charging circuit is it is going straight off the stator, and because it's going through that stator sends one half of the electricity into the frame. It's called grounding, where you can use the whole frame as one cheap big lead. You have to pull less wires through the entire frame to power stuff. And the convention mostly today is to have negative for ground and then positive through kind of like trigger wires. And that's correct with the DC circuit, but as I mentioned, the headlights run off the second half of the wave. If you now want to kind of then save extra electricity and upgrade to LEDs, you need to change the charging circuit. What I've done was I have floated the stator inside, and I fitted a aftermarket regulator rectifier that sits in here that converts everything to DC. And that now turns everything off on, all of my accessories, including the lights, through a relay that sits higher up in here, and that position is important. You need a relay in general because you can't just kind of pull all of that from one wire. You need something to kind of amplify a signal. That relay goes fed from a battery that sits in there and is triggered through one of those running lights in here, not the indicator. That relay needs to sit somewhere soft, because these single cylinders, they vibrate quite a lot, so you can trash a relay in no time. You just shake it to pieces. The second is it needs to be high up, because if you're going through water crossings like me, you can flood it, and once it's flooded you can get corrosion to come in and it can get stuck on. One of the updates I've got next to the headlights is I've got this voltage indicator that shows me how much charge I've got in the battery and how much is going into the stator as well. So when I'm riding, I can actually see that if I turn my heated grips on and my spotlights, how happy my charging system is. If I can see it drop down, then I can just like reduce the power draw. Next to here, I've got my 12-volt outlet. I usually use that for my pump that I use to pump up my tires. Further down, I've got my main USB port, or my main USB charger on here that charges my phone. Next to it, I've got a second one. I've even got a third one under the seat in here as well. That sits in there, so I can charge stuff while I'm on the go as well under my seat and keep it out of the elements. And again, like all of these turn on with the lights. One little caveat I might just mention quickly as well with the lights is if you do upgrade to these LED lights, these are M3 bulbs from eBay. Please modify them so they don't shine straight out. The factory pattern from them is horrible. Going away from the electrics a little bit, you may have noticed I've got a windscreen on here. That is not from factory. I always wanted to have a bit of extra wind protection. That's one of the cool features of this motorbike. And doesn't just keep the wind off you, it also keeps the rain off you. The bark busters do their part as well, besides just protecting it in a tip over. I've also fitted this mud flap as well to stop the rain that gets flung up from the wheel onto my feet. Fitting the windscreen was a bit of an ordeal because there's no kits that you can get. I have made my own mounting bracket with a welder that goes off the spotlight mounts and goes into here, into these carbon fiber tubes. These tubes are of a DJI M600, which holds the arms or the motors to mount it. The windscreen is a Puig or Puig. They're a Catalan company from part of Spain. And this was originally for a CB500X. I just kind of played around with the spare windscreen until I found a position. I was like, hey, you know what? I could make this work. I just had to cut this here up a little bit. This is in a bit of a darker tint as well. And I've had to mount this on here because they started to crack. My mount actually outlasted the stock windscreen. There you can see where it cracked from Cape York. Now that's all fixed up. The first item, and it's also one of the first mod I was doing on a motorbike, is I mounted a phone mount. This is the Ram Quick Grip, which I absolutely love because it's single-handed operation and it's pretty strong as well. The mirrors, they are of a CRF 250L. I think they just look a bit nicer. On here I've got a bicycle computer which tells me my trip. That trip is really useful for kind of measuring or monitoring your fuel economy and just kind of like your trips as well, and do some other kind of trick stuff which you just don't get with the stock odometer. It also tells you your temperature. It's nice to know your temperature, like how warm and how cold it is. On here I've got a little pouch for my sunglasses, and in here I keep a hat. The hat is just purely because when I'm riding, it's not a perfect construction. The wind pushes through here and straight into my face. That keeps it down. If I want to cool off on a really hot day, I can take this out. And when I arrive on a cold day, I've always got a hat with me. And my mount for my personal locator beacon. This is a really useful device. If you ever get into distress, this is more reliable than a Spot or other kind of devices. They don't require subscription and they've got much bigger signal range as well. Going a bit further back, up here you've got a center rack. That is actually also a Honda accessory you can put on. I think it's awesome because I can fit stuff like my helmet on here and some other items without messing up these plastics on here. It's kind of an alternative to a tank bag. The seat, I've added a seat mesh that is kind of like also a mandatory accessory if you've been in Southeast Asia for quite a while. It just gives you a bit more padding because the foam that is in these seats is rock hard. I don't know why motorbikes so often have hard seats. This also has been modified below. For some reason, this seat is nice and wide, which makes it really comfortable. It's so much wider than similar motorbikes. But the shape is weird. It's kind of like tilted forward and it pushes you down, which kind of gives you a wedgie all day. I have had enough of that at some point and I've just taken off the cover. Didn't find a saddler, so what I've just done is I just shaved the foam back and I took a mesh gel seat pad and just fitted that in here, put it down in the right shape, and now it's working wonderfully. These stands, even though they look stock, they're not. They are kind of Honda part numbers. If you mount these taller tires and lift the bike, you tend to find out that the stand makes a big difference. From factory, the stand is already really short, so the bike tilts over quite a bit when you stand it down. I've dropped it even a few times from just standing stock. So once lifted, it was even worse. My solution was to look around on bikes that are similar, and I found that the Grom stand has the same mounting point on here, and it would almost fit, and it was the exact right length. The only problem was that this spring on here mounts on the other side, so I just had to chop it off and then mount it on here. The center stand, all bikes should have a center stand, please. It makes changing tires and maintenance so much easier. Another small modification, as such, maybe a little tip, is Brisbane and Australians love traffic lights in their suburbs, and these traffic lights often have magnetic coils under there. They struggle to identify motorbikes. One thing that can help you is just to install neodymium magnets under here, and they help you being kind of detected by the traffic lights. Going back one more step, I've got my panniers on here. These are Nelson Rig 3050. Those are the bigger size that Nelson Rig make. These are great. They fit a lot of stuff. These are my second set of panniers. The first ones I had a rack made by a Thai mechanic that just was a straight bar from here to the back. It was very crude and basic, and it was mostly to stop the panniers from hitting the rear wheel. These taller bags, because they're so much higher or they go further down, at one point I actually burned a hole with the previous rack because that exhaust goes up here. What I've done is I've made my own racks out of like old chair parts. I hope you can see it. I know it's getting a bit dark. And they have got these stoppers on here that stop them from going further down and touching the exhaust. These have actually prevented even damage to the bike on a few times when it falls over, because it falls into those panniers first. The rack is essentially made out of chair parts. These are actually the legs of the chairs, so I've got this nice foot on here to make it a bit smoother and softer. And that's where you also get these free bends for free. Bending metal is really hard, or bending tubing. It's already hard enough to weld that stuff, so don't make your life more difficult. This is as narrow as it can be. You want to keep your bike as narrow as possible, because the wider you make it, the more wind resistance you have, and that's why all these adventure bikes tend to have 100 horsepower, so they can headbutt themselves through the air. There's a popular GIF and video of a guy who went in a port and he clipped a bollard with his pannier and fell down into a boat. It looks kind of funny, but like, I hope he didn't get too hurt, that poor guy. Another addition I've also done with this rack is down here, that pipe. One of the heaviest items you can carry are your tools, and these are your spanners, your tire levers. I tend to carry them in here. This is just a PVC sewage pipe or drain pipe, which is a lot stronger than some of the other pipes. It's a very popular mod in Australia. I have fitted this with these standard mounting rings. I know it's pretty dark, I hope it comes through on camera, just to mount it on. However, it still wouldn't sit without touching the chain guard, and again, with the fear of hurting my feet, this round shape is not going to hurt me as much. I have used these cable ties just to hold them up to one side, and if I do crash and it lands on my foot, these cable ties will give in, and the whole thing can move out of the way as well. The last modification I've got on here is my top box and the top box carrier as well. The top box carrier, it just started life originally as just your basic tie spec luggage rack. These are good enough. They're really much stronger than the racks you find for a lot of auto motorbikes, but it just wasn't strong enough for me. I started eventually just pinging these pieces here with all the vibrations from the bike, and the top box is quite heavy as well, compared to something like even my 500X's original GV rack, until I modified it, which only had a 6 kilogram rating. This box weighs 5. And that rack actually was like rated only for that weight. This is a GV Outback tracker in the smaller size. You wouldn't want to go any bigger because they go very, very heavy very quickly. It actually follows Austin Vince's formula for luggage, which is soft bags for most items, and that way if you fall over you don't hurt yourself or the bike, and a lockable top box for convenience, so you can get into your stuff very quickly and you can lock it for safety as well. I'm not sure if you can see it in video, but like, it looks a bit shiny in the center, and that's because I carry my sleeping roll on top of here. It's also got these great mounting points, and it's got these handles. You can see that one's bent a little bit because this box lends itself a lot for grabbing onto when maneuvering the bike, but also, sorry, there you go, maneuvering the bike and picking it up as well. The Wave doesn't need it as much, the 500X does, because it's a lot more top heavy. That mostly concludes all of the bike. I know that I've forgotten some items. Please leave me a comment if you think what else I should do and what I have forgotten, what I have done wrong. What is it like to ride? Well, Callum will have given you quite a few opinions in his video. I'll just give you mine very quickly. I feel that it's kind of like one of the easiest bikes to pick up and to learn. It's a bit like a kind of oversized and heavy BMX bike, because it carries all of its weight so low down, and because it weighs so little to begin with. It's really easy to just kind of pick up and learn. That automatic clutch also makes it easier to pick up. If you've ridden bicycles, this kind of like feels almost like second nature, and you kind of like wonder why bicycles are kind of like not more stable. I have given people instructions on this here much more happily than on something even bigger. With the box off, because that box does add you a little bit of kind of like weight high up, it's really flickable. It's got the maneuverability of a housefly. It's also got that like nice tight turning circle, so you can turn it around on like almost any spot. It just gives you even more confidence also when you're going off-road and you can get stuck in some places. It does feel a bit larger compared to something like a CT 110 or a Wave 110, but again, because it's so light, the plastics, they just don't weigh anything. It almost weighs the same. It actually feels kind of like just as easy to ride as well. What would I change on this motorbike? Not very much really. I mean, there's a couple cosmetic items like this panel that is a bit scratched up. The biggest item I would like to change maybe is that head shake. That's something I know that can be addressed. So if you kind of shake it like this, you can see the whole bike, just do that. I think that is partly because of those tall wheels and tall tires. Maybe if I fit wider rims, that might help it a little bit. It's not the end of the world. I can live with it. That's why I still consider this my all round the world bike. I love the chain guard, but it does ring in fourth gear with that bigger chain. Apparently the Grom, some versions, they howl a little bit in with the original sprocket that acts like a bit of a resonator or a bit of a speaker. I would also love to have it a bit more capable off-road. I don't want to get a CT110. This can almost do everything. The only stuff it would need to do that, and these are now mods that Honda would have to do, are a dual transmission. Please put a dual transmission engine out again. I would swap the entire engine for that, because then I can have my nice 4-speed for just kind of tootling around town and my normal touring, and then if I go off-road I can have like a nice low first gear. The bigger one as well with that would be maybe a bash plate in the front, so I don't mess up my nice plastics or my nice fairings. These are already a bit kind of like messed up on here from shipping when I had these fairings all replaced. I did replace all of the plastics with different colors. And maybe a bigger fuel tank. The 5.4 litre tank is already a big improvement compared to the 4 litres, together with the better fuel economy compared to the old Innova. A last one would maybe be, I keep saying that this engine is good enough, maybe 190cc. It doesn't have to go crazy. Just a bit more power so it can tour a bit kind of more comfortably at like 90 kilometers or maybe 100 kilometers an hour reliably. But other than that, I still think it's the perfect bike. It's my forever bike, and I hope you like this review and let me know what you think.
What an incredible bike. That is an around the world machine. Tom is genuinely planning on taking that around the world. He can be found on Facebook, Tom on a Budget. Follow his page. He does a lot of camping trips in Australia where he's living at the moment, and he documents lots of photos, huge albums full of hundreds of photos of his trips that he's had on that bike and a few of his other bikes that he owns. If you want to have your bike on the channel, please send me a message on my social media, either Small Bike Stuff on Instagram, which is instagram.com/smallbikestuffig, or Facebook, which is facebook.com/smallbikestuff. Ask me in a message for the template video. I will send you the template video. You can write out the steps and follow them while you're filming. There's just 8 steps, such as filming your engine, getting some generic shots of the bike, do your controls, your wheels, your tires, how it feels to ride, any negatives and the positives of ownership, the controls, different things like that. It's super simple. It's a really easy step-by-step process, and anyone can do it. You can either do it super quickly and super basic with a phone, or you can be like Tom here and use 4 or 5 cameras and a whole bunch of auxiliary microphones, which I've adored. This has been a long edit. It's taken a long time to get all these raw clips together. I've edited this whole video from a ton of raw clips by Tom, but in lieu of making this video another 25-30 minutes long, I'll end it here. If you want your video to be on Small Bike Stuff, send me a message, Instagram or Facebook. Thank you so much, Tom. It's going to be the world's best Honda Wave, the ultimate touring bike, and if you're living around the world, chances are you'll see Tom sometime soon. Thanks for watching.